Hi guys. Hello YouTube. It has been a long time since I've done something on YouTube. It has been at least 3 months since I did anything on YouTube. And last year I was incredibly inactive, but I've been thinking about what I can seemingly maybe produce on a semi-regular basis for a while. And you know what I want to be doing right now? I want to be gushing about certain pop culture things that have been absorbing my brain for quite some time and have been resulting in a lot of just buzzy, happy, excited feelings. So most notably, and what I'm going to be starting with, is talking about Critical Role Campaign 3, Episode 51. And by the time this comes out, by the time I already know, like, at the point of filming, Episode 52 has already come out on Twitch, Episode 52 hasn't yet come out on YouTube. I'm already belated. But I want to gush, and it's making me super duper excited. So, for now, I'm calling this sort of whatever this is gonna be, maybe. I'm excited. And it's a bad pun, but you know what? And I'm just going to basically sit here with my cup of tea. I've made some notes and gush about Campaign 3 of Critical Role, Episode 51, and why I think it was such an extraordinary episode and kind of has revitalized my energy for kind of just having to watch the next episode, which is something that I've kind of fallen off the train a little bit. So yeah, I'm just going to talk until I get bored, which is going to take a while because I've got a lot to unpack here. So yeah. So for anyone who's not been here for a while, hi, my name's Jenny. And I've been a critter since Campaign 1. At the point where Campaign 1 came out, I was at the point in my life where my way of watching YouTube was to obsessively watch every single video on a channel and every single spin-off from said channel, until I'd watched all the content on all of the channels and all of the extended channels, and then I would subscribe to said channel. So at the point where Critical Role Campaign 1 came out, I had been subscribed to Geek and Sundry for the Guild, because my sister watched the Guild, which then made me watch anything else involving Felicia Day, including like Legend of Neil, which has aged poorly, but is still part of internet history, and so on and so forth until Geek and Sundry. And Geek and Sundry came out, and I was still in this phase where I had to watch all the content that was available. And Critical Role came out, the first episode that was released to YouTube, and I didn't get it. I was very confused because I didn't realize it was part of a pre-existing campaign and there wasn't really a point zero. Part of me obsessing about watching the whole of a YouTube channel was so I could go all the way back to a point zero and start from that place and work forward. But I couldn't because it was a off-stream campaign that then became a stream campaign. So I remember starting to watch the first episode that was released and not getting it. And then the next episode came out and I was like, oh, okay, so this is like a long-running series, or will be a long-running series. Okay. And I remember watching episode 2 and not really getting it. And then by the time episode 3 came around, I watched all 3 and was like hooked for life. Like completely addicted. Couldn't wait for the next episode. And I will tell you that when it comes to Critical Role, I have honestly watched every single episode of Campaign 1 probably close to 10 times each. I can't genuinely set an actual like timeline on how many times I've watched Campaign 1 because obviously I watched it as it was released. So a lot of the time I'd watch it overnight, which it started at 3 a.m. in the UK. I would start watching it, I'd fall asleep, and then I'd just get up in the morning and watch as much as I could before the next day. And then I'd rewatch the episode while more or less conscious. And then I'd rewatch the episode again at least one more time during the week before the next episode came out. And then since then I think I've done like, and then I would go back and I'd occasionally watch like special episodes or rewatch arcs. And then I've since rewatched the whole Campaign 1 2 or 3 times in full. So I cannot even tell you how many times I've rewatched Campaign 1. Campaign 2, I really struggled to get into. It took me a long time to get into Campaign 2, and I can honestly say I've only watched it once. I watched the first maybe 4 or 5 episodes 3 or 4 times because it took me that many times to get into it. The characters I found harder to relate to. There wasn't really a character that I locked onto as a character that I felt a deep connection with, in the same way that I felt a deep connection with Keyleth. And oh boy, are we going to be talking about Keyleth later in this particular session. So yeah, Campaign 2, I completely and utterly skipped over at the point it was during, a lot of it was during the pandemic. I couldn't quite get into it. I was distracted by other things. And so I have only just, like, within, I think it was the tail end of last year, watched all of campaign 3, and I watched all of them once. I haven't really gone back and rewatched episodes. There's obviously the iconic clips from campaign 2 that have been shown more than once, like the dinner with the devil scene, some of the Caleb fire scenes, some of the Caleb rage scenes, obviously Jester and the cupcake, Jester and Ford's romance scenes, and a lot of stuff with Bo and the Asher that's come forward again and again and again. But I didn't follow campaign 2 obsessively. I couldn't latch onto it in the same way the campaign 1 latched into my brain. And campaign 3 took me a couple of attempts to get into, and I keep falling off getting into it and getting out to it. I think it's because it's no longer, it's 3 out of 4 a week, and part of me subconsciously doesn't want to get to the end of a 3-week session and then have to wait 2 weeks for the next one. So subconsciously I then turn off, and then it'll be 2-3 weeks before I realise that I've missed it, and then I've got to catch up. But I have gotten into it again, and I was at the point of actually watching it more or less on schedule, and then episode 51 happened, and I have so many thoughts. So for anyone who has managed to make it into this far in the video and hasn't already kind of buzzed off, yeah, woof. There will be spoilers for all 3 campaigns. All 3 campaigns in the rest of this video. If you didn't already work that out, there will be full-on spoilers for all 3 campaigns. You have been warned. This is your warning. If you're not interested in being spoiled all the way up until episode 51 and potentially some crazy nutty theories that I have about going forward into campaign 3 and onwards, turn off now if you are at all interested in stuff. If you want to hear me just ramble and be excited, then feel free to stick around. I'm going to have a sip of tea. I'm excited! Right, so I want to talk about, to begin with, one of the criticisms that I've heard about episode 51 that for some reason just keeps popping up and I don't quite understand, but I want to address it, is episode 51 was a bit railroady. The players didn't have that much agency in directly what was happening in the events of the story. And I strongly disagree. I feel like a lot of this particular episode, Matt very, very clearly set the stakes as well and truly, like, over-leveled for the players. The players are not really meant to be interacting with this part of the story at this point, and that's why it's important that they do, and why they manage to survive. So let's kind of like set the scene for episode 51. So episode 51 is like the end point for the big bad's big evil plan to potentially release a god eater. It's enormous. It is cataclysmically world enormous. It is god eating, and the one of the key villains from campaign 2 who was overpowered for the campaign 2 characters with a character like it is crazy huge. And that's one of the things that also has put me off campaign 3 a little bit and found it a bit hard to get into, is our characters are still like under level 10. I think they have just leveled up to level 9 at the end of this episode. I think they're level 8 dummies in this episode. They are dealing with cataclysmic god-eating stuff. They are underleveled for what they are dealing with. They are not meant to be here. They are not meant to be the ones dealing with this circumstances. They are not meant to be the ones dealing with this tier of villains. The villains that they are dealing with are so above and beyond where the players are at this point. It's genuinely laughable. And Matt has been very, very, very clear about setting that tone and setting the seriousness of this event. A couple of episodes ago, we had the introduction of the Judicators, who were these terrifying, paladins gone to the extreme, created by Vasselheim, entities that have given up their humanity in the service of the gods, and they've basically become like human Terminator creatures that are there to inflict the will of Vasselheim on the world. And they were scary as fudge. We have in this episode piles and piles of literal bodies, heads on spikes, all sorts of carnage around the location that our heroes are just traipsing through, including the corpses of Judicators. Piles of bodies, like skyships taken down, literal, like, warning signs everywhere that this is incredibly dangerous. And that's the base level. We have villains that are so crazy overpowered in comparison to the heroes that we are currently inhabiting that we shouldn't be interacting with. Like, if we go to the lowest level named villain that we have in this environment is General Ratanish, who kicked the booty of one of our player characters not too long ago, unarmed, and made it look easy. And yes, it was a throwaway, it was kind of a joke thing. It was a bit of like, martial combat in the middle of a party. It was a fun moment for both Ashton and Ratanish. Sets the character up, all of that jazz. But it does prove his fighting prowess. He is surrounded by allies, he has his weapons on him, and he is ready to lay some shiz down. And he is the lowest tier of villain that we are interacting with here. Next up the line, I'd say, would be Liliana Timold, Imogen's mother, who has the same powers as Imogen, but has been using them for 30 years longer than Imogen? Easily 20 years longer than Imogen. So if you think about the level of Warlock versus the level of Warlock alone, like, that is a formidable villain. That is a terrifying level of formidable. Then you have Ludinus, who is like the highest level wizard that we've interacted with on an actual combative level of all three campaigns. I think probably the closest we've ever had in terms of wizardry would be some of the boss battles towards the end of campaign 2, but Ludinus didn't even participate in them. Ludinus has never raised a finger in combat because he is above it all. Like, let's just be honest about that. Ludinus is the strongest wizard ever, and the Mighty Nine, who were level, I want to say 15, 16 at the end of the campaign. I've not looked up any of these details. I'm just running entirely off memory and the notes that I have taken. I've not looked anything up, so do not quote me on this. But Ludinus was not defeated by the Mighty Nine when Mighty Nine were a team and were all level 15. He's crazy up there. They were terrified of him. The scenes with Ludinus in campaign 2 are so tense and so nerve-wracking. And he just has complete control. Like, these level 8 numpties should not be interacting with Ludinus. They've interacted him from a distance. They've had one conversation with him, and he did not care about them because they weren't relevant. That is the reason why they are important characters. I'll go a little bit more into that later, probably, if I remember. Again, this is stream of consciousness. Then we have Otahan, who at this point has been established as being able to kick the entire party's ass with genuine ease, and is fundamental to Auron's backstory, having killed, potentially, at the time, I just spilled tea all over myself. Yep, this is one of those videos. Like, Auron's backstory features his husband and his father being killed on an attack on Keyleth. And we can only assume that at that point in the story, his father and his husband were considerably higher level than him. If we were to look back to the wedding episode in campaign 1, or, the one-shot in the campaign 1 universe, Orm's father by adoption, or father by marriage, was at the wedding of Percy and Vex, and he was able to stand toe-to-toe with the players of Vox Machina. Again, I've not looked up his class and his level, but I'm assuming if he was playing in that one-shot, that he was an equivalent level to Vox Machina at that stage. Vox Machina at that stage were level 20, and he was killed by Otahan in the backstory of Orm's character. So we are dealing with a enemy in Otahan who is powerful enough to take down multiple armed Ashari, attack Keyleth, survive and get out unknown, and take down the current party in just a wiping the floor scene. These player characters, the only person who really seemed to acknowledge that Otahan is terrifying in this particular episode is Marisha, whose character was straight up murdered by Otahan. So that makes sense. So any of those bosses, every single one that I've just named, they should be avoiding those players. These players' characters should be avoiding them. They shouldn't be interacting with them. All of them together in one location with hundreds of minions and also a whole bunch of automata, various other creatures, various other things in their, like, lair, in their dragon's nest. It's terrifying. And Matt was very, very explicit in stating the dangers that they're going into. They had basically an entire planning episode while they were travelling to get here, where the party did what the party does, which is discuss plans and then kind of go, maybe throw a ship at it. But Matt was very, very clear about the tone he was setting. The tone he was setting was, you should be sneaky, you should be under all of the radars, you're getting in, getting out, do what you can, don't try and interact with the enemies, which is what the party were doing consciously. However, the reason why I think people didn't quite read this story as this serious and this dramatic up until the point where meta-knowledge makes us realise how serious it is because of the players. The players are a little bit slap-happy in this episode, which is absolutely fine. It's their game. They should be happy. They should be enjoying themselves. Obviously, the ads always set the tone for fun, stupid times. The outfits always set the tones for fun, stupid times. Laura, bless her, had lost her voice, which added to some nice, fun, funny scenes. You've got Xandis and you've got Ira, who are both funny characters. You've got all of those things that make the tone kind of funny. In terms of also the campaign, one thing that was learnt in campaign 1 was the comedy characters can have really compelling emotional arcs, which just because they're comedy character doesn't mean that they aren't complete whole characters. So that's primarily shown by Scanlan, but also Grog. Those were the comedy characters in campaign 1. They were the funny ones. And eventually, through getting to know their characters, they had really deep emotional stories. Campaign 2, we equally had 2 funny characters. We had Not/Veth, and we had Jester, both of whom were on the surface very silly, funny characters, and underneath it had a really deep, compelling narrative and a really deep emotional story. In this campaign, we have far more comedy characters. We have FCG, we have Chetney and Bertrand, we have Fern, and we had Lorna. That is already more funny characters, percentage-wise, than in the other 2 campaigns. So, by nature, the banter and the interaction between the characters, even though there is darkness, Lorna to be specific, even though there is darkness and depth to these characters, a huge amount of the information that we get about them and a huge amount of the general interaction between the characters is funny, is comedic, is silly. Like, even the more serious characters, like Ashton or like Imogen. Imogen does wild magic, and it has always hilarious, awkward results. Always. So there is a lot more room for levity. And what was interesting about this is when they were doing Lorna's recovery quest, where they were going into Lorna's mind and interacting with the ghost of Delilah, or the spirit or the energy of Delilah. There was a moment in that where Laura, as Imogen, was so stressed out, and she muttered something along the lines of, "Take on Delilah Briarwood at level 5. Ugh. That was the tension that should have been in this episode. This episode, the characters never at least the players never vocalized that the characters were this stressed. And they should have been. And I don't know how much of that is performative or environmental or whatever. I believe Matt resoundingly was selling the concept, to me at least. I was so nervous the whole way through this episode that this was like an endgame serious shiz and was terrifying to me. But the players were having a good time and they were laughing and they were bantering. And so that's why I think it felt railroady when we got to the big endgame moments. Because up until the point where the meta-knowledge of, oh shit, Keyleth might die, and Keyleth is a level 20 archdruid who is super duper powerful and is being taken down in one round, that is when it felt real. And up until that point, it felt kind of floaty and amorphous and blah, blah, blah. And there's the meta-knowledge that you have, like Caleb and Bo and their player characters from the past, so they wouldn't be killed. You know, there's other things going on. Potentially there'll be one-shots in the future. There is this meta-understanding of, he'll be alright. There's a meta-understanding that these characters, as I said, are level 8. So if the world does it, like, there's no way that Matt would let the world end at this point, because the players are so young and the campaign is so young. And all of that meta understanding kind of took away from the impact that I think Matt was trying to have, which was, this is meant to be a serious shiz. This is meant to be like full on tension, anyone could die, you have to be in and out super sneaky, you have one mission, don't interact with things. These level 8 numpties should not be in this situation. The reason why they are in this situation is a genuine compelling reason. There is Imogen's mum. They want to rescue her, they want to get her out. And Orum's whole backstory led to this, which I'll go into some more later. So there is compelling reason for these level 8 characters to be there in terms of their emotional drives to be there and resolve the issue at hand. In terms of their class level, their skill set, and their knowledge, they should not be there. They don't have the allies, they don't have the skills, they don't have any of the stuff that would actually be able to do things that would actually result in change. And that's why it felt railroady, because they shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be on these tracks. The tracks are going. The tracks are way faster than any of these guys can manage. They are still there because they feel like they ought to be. So, relevant to character, but I think they just... The tone balance between what Matt was presenting and how the players reacted to it, I think is why it felt railroady. They had as much control as these level characters would ever have. Notably, one of the other things I really enjoyed about this is it's probably the reason why they're still alive, is because they're so low level. And it's the reason why, you know, they weren't targeted, or the reason why they could get as far as they could on this mission. If they were higher level, and if they had a higher prestige or a higher knowledge, then they would have been targeted like Keyleth was. Specifically, Bo and Caleb, they were known to lewdness. They had made themselves known as relatively high-level potential threats to the plan. That's why they were targeted. These level 8 numpties were not targeted. They were able to complete their mission. They managed to destroy the Fey key, and they managed to do significant damage to this key. And they managed to get in and out, basically, unharmed. Because no one was looking for them. Because no one cared about them, because they were too pathetic to care about. And I've got the feeling that Matt, as a master of long-term storytelling, will probably make the lack of the Fey key and the damage that they actually managed to do in this episode really significant at a later date. I suspect that part of whatever the grand plan was regarding Podothos has been delayed or elongated or some level prevented because of the work that they have done in this episode, so that they have time to potentially prevent it in the future or do whatever they're going to do in the future. So I have no doubt that what they were able to do in this episode is significant and is important to the long term of the story. Anyway, I've completely... Going back to my notes, I've done a lot of this stuff. The other thing that I want to point out as well is why it felt another tonal kind of gap between what Matt was presenting in terms of the setting, the plot, and the level of the darkness that they were dealing with, is the player characters were really successful. The player characters worked so well in this episode. I think it's a side effect of them being really experienced role players at this point, is that they know how to tailor their min-maxing and their RP together to get successful roles for what they're aiming for. And they also know to aim too high above their station. So they know, for example, that Laura, who's playing Imogen, who is a charisma-based character, should be the face of the party. A charisma-based character who has a similar power to the people that they're infiltrating. It makes sense. So, of course, making her the face of the party, making her the one's presentable and doing the deception checks, makes sense from a min-maxing perspective, makes sense from a character perspective, and makes sense from a general point in the story. Similarly, they got so lucky being able to plug FCG into an automaton, so that the party could basically hide in a box while travelling around this thing. The fact that they managed to do that was a game breaker. It is so clever. It is so simple. And it means that basically they had free reign to travel as a whole party inside this fortified location that was incredibly like high risk, high, like all of the people who were in this particular encampment were looking out for potential infiltrators, and they managed to get the whole party inside a robot that no one was going to question because it just looked like a dumb robot. That's so clever and so lucky. But because of that resounding success, again, it messes with the tone. In a way, it would have been better for the tension of the episode and to make it feel less railroady if they failed to get into the automaton. They had to sneak in, and half the party was caught. Half the party was then, you know, interrogated while the others were trying to do their work. And that would have made the tension actually seem real. But because they got so lucky, and because there was a lot of comedic banter and a lot of genuine success in taking on lower level NPCs, it didn't feel like as much of a threat as I think Matt was aiming for, and that's why I think it felt a little bit tonally inconsistent. But I still loved it, and I was still terrified the whole way through, and I'm sure the players were too, even if they weren't necessarily showing how intimidated they were, because I was flipping terrified. Anyway, so now we're going to get into some deep lore. Oh my gosh, I don't know how long this video has been. I'm not going to look at how long it's been. I'm not going to edit this either. I was thinking I might edit it, and I was like, no, this is going to be too long. It's going to take years to edit. Anyway, if you guys are sticking along for the ride, thank you for sticking along for the ride. I appreciate it. I just basically want to get these thoughts out of my brain so they stop living rent-free, rolling around, and I can maybe look back at this in the future and be like, oh, my theories were right. That's cool. Right. Deep lore stuff. So, one of the things I find very interesting between this campaign, Campaign 2 and Campaign 1. Campaign 1 was kind of a standalone thing. The world was being built as Matt was telling the story, as the characters built into the story. And Exandria was kind of expanding as it went. Campaign 2, different continent, but already a pre-existing built world. And Matt was making a very conscientious decision to separate the two campaigns. There was almost no interactions between Campaign 1 and Campaign 2. There was brief Aloria and Kima cameos. There was mentions of the Council of Taldore a lot. There was a few things here and there, but it was very limited, specifically to separate those two. This campaign encompasses all of the campaigns up to this point. We have characters who are deeply entrenched with the lore of the previous two campaigns. Notably, interestingly as well, Marisha and Liam designed characters that didn't retire at the end of their campaign. And they, I believe, are the only two that I can really name that did not retire as such. If we look at Campaign 1, all the characters at the end of that campaign retired, pretty much. We can see Pike and Scanlin kind of doing their family things, kind of settling down. We have Vex and Percy, who settled down and became, running their own little town. They've got plenty of things to do. They've got kids. I was going to say plenty of things to do with each other. Grog kind of goes back to his roots. He is perhaps the epitome of just instinct. He wants to go have fun. He will go and do fighting pits and whore and drink, and that's his life and that's what he loves. And I don't think he's going to stop doing those things, but he wouldn't necessarily go on adventure campaigns without his friends. His friends are what tether him. Obviously, Vax, no longer with us. Keyleth, however, at the end of Campaign 1, Marisha made the choice to say that one of the things that she wanted to do with Keyleth, and one of the things that Keyleth would do as someone who will be living 1,000 years, is setting up intercommunications between multiple civilizations. She is the ruler of her civilization. She'll still be developing as a ruler of her civilization, and she'll be setting up different various interactions between these civilizations. She really wanted to be an ambassador for the Ashari and make it less isolationist and more part of the worldwide community, which means that Keyleth will be continuing to travel, to learn, to develop. Even though she's level 20 and is technically capped, I'm sure the equivalent of if you were to do post-level 20 campaigns, you get feats, you get knowledge. It's been 30 years and she has been active that entire time, continuously working. So at this point, Keyleth is way up there and still active in the world. Equally, at the end of campaign 2, most of the cast are retired, apart from Bo and Caleb, who are specifically going after Luminous, specifically trying to take down the Cerberus Assembly, still trying to learn and develop. So it's been less time for them. I, again, haven't looked at many stats, but it's been less time for them, but potentially they've also gone up multiple levels. Probably not quite at level 20, but getting there. I could look it up. I'm not gonna. So these characters are the ones that are active. Like, even though Kingsley, Jester, and Ford are still active, they are active doing a very specific thing. They are actively sailing and adventuring, but they're not necessarily being active in things that would lead them into this campaign. So the characters that would turn up are relevant to this story. Of course, if Luminous is involved, Bo and Caleb are not far behind. It's just, I find it very interesting that Liam and Marisha's characters are the most active and post-campaign active. Just a thing anyway. But when it comes to what specifically happened in this episode, there is a massive plot reveal regarding Orum's origin story, which we've already gone into in terms of making sure that it's very clear how powerful Otahan is because she took out Orum's father and how high level he must have been. But I'm pretty sure probably what kind of happened right at the beginning of this campaign is Liam, being the wonderful sad boy he is who likes creating sad boy characters, wanted to come up with a tragic backstory. He'd already decided he wanted to be a couple of generations on, and he'd already designed Aurum from the point of the wedding episode. He wanted someone who would be Ashari connected, all of the stuff. So he'd probably been discussing with Matt for quite a long time what his tragic backstory would be, and going from there. And Matt, being the clever story writer that he was, if Liam pitched, there was an assassination attempt on Keyleth, my family died during that assassination attempt, I want to find out who the assassins were, that is my sad backstory. That's absolutely fine. But Matt, I would suspect, would be thinking along the lines of, but why would anyone be stupid enough to attack a legendary fighter, a level 20 archdruid, and the ruler of a civilization whom has protective people all around her? Why would anyone go after Keyleth? Is question number 1. Question number 2 is how? How would someone take, how would someone actually attempt to do damage to Keyleth at the level she's at, when she has beast shapes and other incredibly high powerful forms? Why and how? How would someone attempt to take down Keyleth? And he answered those 2 questions in this episode. Why would someone attempt to take down Keyleth? What if it's not about her? What if it's about Vax? Which is so romantic, and it's like disgustingly romantic and cinematic and like tropish in the best way. Like it's one of those awkward things about the end of campaign 1 that I was wondering if they ever would resolve, is Keyleth's part of Keyleth's arc in campaign 1 is accepting the fact that if she becomes a level 20 archdruid, she will live for 1,000 years, and she will see her entire friend group die. She will outlive everyone she's ever known. And that's so tragic, and one of the things that was holding her back in terms of her anxiety and in terms of her progression was this absolute fear that even if she does everything she could possibly ever do in getting that, she would lose all of her family, she would lose all of her friends and have to outlive them and potentially live to forget them. And that is so devastating as a concept, and of course would cause a load of anxiety and stress for her. And the sad thing about, the tragic thing about the Vax-Keyleth relationship is he dies when she's 27 of 1,000 years, and eventually she will hopefully move on and learn to love someone. But as is posed through the tropist nature of this sort of story, Vax comes back at the wedding, Vax potentially leaves ravens on the tree in her town, and now has apparently been watching over her this whole time. So what do we want for Keyleth and Vax? Do we want Keyleth to eventually move on and find another love and make a family of her own and all of these sort of things? Or do we want Keyleth and Vax forever? Keyleth and Vax forever! And it's definitely one of those two separate tropes that I've always found to be a great contention in my brain, where is the childhood sweetheart the one you should be with forever? Particularly with these epic, romantic, overblown stories. Is there a potential future for Vax and Keyleth, or does his death and her long life actually create a beautiful kind of story in of itself? And like when you look at Vax and Keyleth as alternative characters, you've got Vax, who was an assassin, who was very deeply associated with death and darkness, and then he became a paladin and Raven Queen, again death and darkness. And you have Keyleth, who is all about light and nature and energy and all of those kind of joyous things. So there's a beautiful, like, there's poetry to their relationship. That's where I'll go to. And there's also a tragedy to their relationship. And I don't know where I wanted that to end up, and if there is a way for that story to progress or resolve itself in a different way to where it was left at the end of campaign 1. But this episode put a real big pin in that, because Vax has been watching over Keyleth this whole time, and I love it. It broke me. It was so beautiful and so cinematic, and just like chef kiss, cinematic amazingness. And I was there with the cast where I was like, oh my god, and Liam's out of body moment. Yes, beautiful. But it answers that question of why would anyone bother attacking Keyleth? It seems stupid. What if it was bait to check if there was still a connection with divinity? What if it was to test to see what her security measures is and what her fighting style is? And what if it was to cause enough damage to her life and her civilization and her people, so that no matter what the risks, no matter what the danger to herself or to others, she would not stop until the perpetrators of said attack were vanquished. And that is the three prongs of what the backstory of Orum's character means. That's why Keyleth was attacked. To make sure they could assess how dangerous she was in combat and work out how to defeat her in combat, work out a perfect, long-term, it's been multiple years, a perfect trap for her, work out if there was still a connection with divinity in the form of Vax. I don't know whether or not there was any evidence of that during the fight, the initial backstory of Orum, or whether or not they just knew that there was a connection between Vax and Keyleth. I don't know how they would have assessed that, given that the player characters never knew. But there must have been some trace that Vax was still watching over Keyleth in order for her to be bait for him. And 3, to make sure that she would be there and be prepared to put herself in danger. And so, yes, it felt railroady in some ways, but it felt like a perfect plan. It was a perfect trap that was, like, went off to a T with contingency. They had so much contingency in place. So they had Orum's family being killed, so you have basically the trap laid. They had Ludinus. They let slip that Ludinus had been kind of sloppy, and somehow that, like, he was traceable, so Ludinus was letting that slide. They had Keyleth's message to Orum through the seed saying, we've been fighting these Ashari betrayers. They've been a real problem for us. We basically just did a giant dungeon crawl to defeat these Ashari betrayers. It's super duper bad. They're really annoying. They've been absorbing so much of my time and energy for so long. I'm not being able to concentrate on anything else. This has been my life. We've been dealing with this drama. And then at the point where I got to the end of their boss battle, and this is again summary of the message, when we got to the end of the boss battle, the evil boss was like, hey, Ludinus is to blame, choo choo choo, he's the one who's responsible, also, ley lines, do 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 do, you better go deal with that, I'm evil, la la la. It gave her a target, a perfect target, matching up with what Orum was already investigating. Of course she's going to turn up to that. It also answers part of the question. How do you deal with someone who's so OP? You basically make them do a dungeon crawl with a boss battle, take out a bunch of their allies, and then speed up time so they have to go into their next boss battle unaware that they are the target, slightly drained of resources. She turns up as Ketor, which is super awesome and wonderful, and I was in there with Marisha dancing in the background because it's super cool and iconic that Ketor. But that is not her strongest form. Her strongest form would be a beast shape. She could be a Palantir, or she could be a dragon, and she turns up as Ketor. And that to me speaks that she was quite drained by that point. Even as a level 20 plus feated max level Archdruid, quite depleted at that point. She's possibly travelled her entire Ashari fighting party with her, having done a dungeon crawl and a boss battle, and at that point she might be a bit weaker. Perfect, part of the plan, run her down as much as possible and then get her there. That was the plan, and I'm sure that she was saying in a bunch of her, in the message, that a load of her party members, a load of the Ashari were hurt. I have no doubt that so much of what they were targeting during that dungeon crawl, presumably that was happening, and the boss battle that happened, again, all described just in this very short message, that they were targeting her teammates and not her, so she had to spend magical resources to keep her teammates up before getting to the boss battle. So she is slightly drained by this point. Then, as I previously discussed, the player characters that evil NPCs, the primary villains we have 3 different classes of very OP. We have a wizard, we have a warlock, and we have a fighter, all of whom are magically augmented and ready for exactly that circumstance. And so we have a power word stun followed by melee attacks, and that is exactly how you get a Keyleth. That is exactly how you would attack a high-level Archdruid, is a power word stun followed by melee attacks. It was a perfect trap, and I loved it. Was it railroady? No, because it was the plan of the villain, and who obviously has a very smart DM behind him, and it was all orchestrated. This has been 6 years in the works. This attack that was in Oren's backstory was like 5-6 years ago. They've had 6 years to tweak this plan and augment this plan. In the meantime, all of these evil NPCs have been leveling up and have been getting closer to their goal and making it more and more like a perfect trap for Keyleth. So of course it went off without a hitch, even with Bo and with Caleb, because of course they made themselves known. The only part of the plan that didn't go perfectly was what Bell's Hells were doing, because Bell's Hells were too low level and too unimportant to matter to the high level villains. And so that's why I think what happened in this episode will be really impactful in potential future episodes of this campaign, because what they did with Fakey and what they did to damage this particular key will come forward, because it was important, and it was more important for the fact that they were underleveled. Right. Let's see. In terms of that moment, yes, it did totally break me. It was beautiful. The moment where Vax turned up, it was amazing. It was cinematic. It was lovely. What was great about that is you had a roller coaster. You had highs and lows of emotions. You had the high of having Keyleth come in as Ketor, like it really upped. You had the lows of having Bo and Caleb caught. You had the high of Ketor coming in. You had the low of her nearly dying. The high of Vax coming to her rescue. And then you had the low of what happened next, because it was all part of the plan. And all of that was perfectly, like, there was so much foreshadowing. If you look at it and you really pay attention, there was foreshadowing, there was details, a lot of which I've already discussed. But in terms of the emotional roller coaster, it was so good. It was exactly what you want. It was so cinematic. It was so beautiful. Yes, romanticizes Fudge, and I have some issues with, like, let Vax die or let Vax be, and I am totally devastated if Vax is, like, used as a lens permanently, or his energies or whatever residual Vax energy is left, because that is so deeply traumatizing for Keyleth. To have Keyleth get basically her ass handed to her, and then have Vax rescue her only for him to then be used, and to know she was bait. Like, that is so deeply hurtful. That is, like, kudos to Matt, who I don't think is a bad person, but that is deeply vindictive on Keyleth. In a way, it's kind of good that Marisha wasn't playing Keyleth at the time, that she was being operated as an NPC, because that is rubbing so much salt into the wound that is deeply traumatizing. So I really hope that's resolved at some point in the future. I hope we have a therapy session with Keyleth about that, or like I hope for good outcomes, because that is rough. So yeah. Anyway. Right. I think that's most of what I want to talk about regarding things. So now on to some additional laws and theories. And again, I have no longer idea how long I've been talking. My tea's getting cold, so I'm just gonna... I'm done. Right. So this one's some weird, crazy lore theories that I'm just going to quickly go into. So I have a couple of things that have just kind of eked out in my brain the last couple of days. So one of the things that has been mentioned several times, which confuses me, and I have a theory for, is why Paragons Cool wear the Raven Queen sigil when they are so heavily associated with all of this stuff to do with killing gods. Now, there's one interpretation that I've come up with, which is basically Ratanish views the Raven Queen as a role model in terms of killing the gods and becoming equal to them. Killing the gods and having freedom. Which I think is a wonderful, ironic misinterpretation of what happened with the Raven Queen. Now, obviously, the Raven Queen's ascension is something of a mystery. The closest we've had to clarity regarding that is the Vecna plotline in Campaign 1, where it had another entity trying to ascend, and we've had multiple examples of people trying to ascend. Particularly, it's mentioned quite heavily in the Calamity miniseries. But generally speaking, I think one of two things happened with the Raven Queen. One is a sort of genie in the bottle karmic justice situation, where if she did intend to kill the god of death, and did successfully kill the god of death, in granting her wish to kill him, she then had to step into his role. So in order to free the genie, in order to wish to have the powers of a genie, you then are trapped in a lamp. That sort of karmic justice situation where she then is trapped in the role of becoming the goddess of death because she defeated the god of death. And I think that's a wonderful way that it could be played off or translated. The other version of it is that it could be a like fate situation regarding if you like it's the god of death and fate. And I think the most kind of karmically in key thing that can happen with the god of death and fate is that they accept that eventually they will die and they will be surpassed, and that is their fate. So it wasn't necessarily that she chose to ascend. It might have been something more along the lines of she was always fated to ascend. The god of death was always fated to be overturned, and a new god of death was always due to take its place. And so it wasn't so much of a deliberate action, a deliberate malicious attempt to kill the god of death, but something that was always fated to happen and is like a gentle successor. And I know this is not the correct analogy because it is not a law that I necessarily want to buy into at this point in time, but if we think of an equivalent analogy, we have the Deathly Hallows, where death accepts the cloak bearer as their equal and they walk off into death together. And I feel like there could be a certain level of the god of death accepting the Raven Queen as an equal and then stepping out of the way so she can then take its place. So it was more of a submission of a passing of the torch more than a hostile takeover. Both of which would not work with the interpretation that Ratanish has, which is a murder and ascension. Now, all of those options could be possible. That's what I like about god-based mythology, as you can interpret it as you will. I just found that super duper useful. The third option that I could have, regarding specifically the Vax plotline, is that they wear the symbol of the Raven Queen as a sort of knowing blasphemy against the Raven Queen, which would mean that at the point that Keyleth is being attacked, the point of the trap being sprung for Vax, there is a more heavy focus of the eyes of the Raven Queen on this circumstance. If they have potentially hundreds of people wearing the symbol of the Raven Queen, blessed iconography of the Raven Queen, at the point where they are laying this trap for Keyleth to summon Vax, then perhaps it's more likely to draw the attention of the Raven Queen and therefore her champion to the circumstance. So that could be Britanish's interpretation of the Raven Queen and the idea of destroying the gods and ascending, or it could be a way of helping lure Vax to it, another temptation in the sprung trap, as it were. Similarly, I've heard a couple of meta kind of ideas for the end of this story and how this story will play into the campaign going forward and potential campaigns going forward in Critical Role. So there's a lot of fan speculation about maybe Critical Role creating their own system and moving away from Dungeons and Dragons, and kind of creating their own independent system away from Wizard of the Coast, particularly with some of the shady business that's happened in the last year regarding OGLs. And so that seems potentially a possibility for the future. So one of the things that might be being set up by Matt in this particular campaign is one of the main things that tethers the world of Exandria to the Wizard of the Coast is the fact that they use the same pantheon. So if you destroy and then rebuild the pantheon with a different set of deities, and then it's easier to, from a lore perspective, step forward into a different world. And he's already done, as part of the world of Exandria, these kind of big resets, which he said has been a way of creating like cool dungeons, is because there's been history that's been destroyed and rebuilt, history that's been destroyed and rebuilt. So that's the scenes with the Calamity, means that you get cool dungeons, you get all of the Aeor stuff at the end of campaign 2, with like all of the stuff that he's built into the lore of the world, means that you have these kind of big points to reset, with the Apogee Solstices being kind of a nice trigger point for that. So potentially that could be something that going forward is that he destroys and rebuilds the Pantheon, and then he can have a world that's separate to Wizards of the Coast. So that is potentially what they're working towards. Seems a bit extreme, particularly as there are PCs from previous campaigns that would be deeply impacted if that were a thing. What I'm thinking might be more kind of a subtle progression is moving the gods from one face to another, basically progressing. So in the same way that if the previous god of death became the Raven Queen, maybe either some characters might ascend to replace the deities that they are, or they might remask or rename the deities but hold the same kind of focus. And that was one of the things I think was kind of potentially being set up with Vordo and Etherdoc, which I did look up those names. Those are the only two things I did look up before filming this video. Everything else is just my brain, just spurting ideas. So those guys who were killed by Pedathos, Matt laid claimed that potentially some of what they oversaw as deities were then claimed by other deities. So Fate and Order, and Shadow and Darkness and Winter. And what I find interesting is he noted that Shadow, Darkness and Winter was overtaken by the Raven Queen, and that Fate and Order, they weren't really sure what that was taken over by. It could have been one of the other members of the Pantheon. However, a theory that I have in my head is that Vordo, the deity of Fate and Order, that was destroyed by Pedathos, was potentially the orchestrator of the Luxon, was potentially the whole source of the Luxon, and the Luxon, as part of Vordo, was then shattered and became these relics, which I think is really interesting, because I feel like Fate and Order could be easily associated with the more physics-based things that the Luxon lays claim over. Time, space, and physics is what the Luxon kind of controls. And I feel like that can be falling under the description of fate and order. And that kind of makes sense to me. And part of what's feeding this theory for me, well, there's two reasons. So in the key used to unlock or attempt to unlock Pedathos, there were two elements. There was the lens, which was fueled by the Raven Queen, whose kind of shadow and darkness is potentially part of the stuff that Etherdoc was lording over, and the Luxon, which was used to power the device, speed up time and get Keyleth there on time, but also was the key kind of battery source of the power to power the key, in the same way that the crown was the main power source for the Fey key. There seems to be a power source and then a lens. As far as I can tell, I'm sure Matt will potentially clarify this in the future, but how I'm translating it at the moment with the information I have, there is a power source and there is a lens. The power source for the key that Ira was working on was the crown, the lens was what Maury provided. For the main key, the power source was the Luxon, and then the lens was Vax. Now, my theory for Pedathos is that he didn't necessarily destroy the gods, but absorbed them. He consumed them. He took them into himself. And there is some aspect of their energy that still exists as part of Pedathos. And if we're saying that the Luxon, if we're saying that Vordo, who was absorbed, his kind of shattered self and part of his field of power is under the Luxon, then we can equally say that Etherdoc, part of his power, has then fallen to the Raven Queen. And then those two elements are what were put into the key, which then powered to try and break out Pedathos. So it's not necessarily Pedathos himself that's being broken out, but aspects of his energy, aspects of other deities' energy that exists and he has absorbed. This might be very heady, I'm just trying to put it into words. We'll see if anything makes sense in future episodes. But anyway, so to me that makes sense. I feel like the Vordo, Luxon, that power source, Etherdox, Raven Queen, that power source combined to get at least a connection with the internal kind of power source of Pedathos. It just makes sense to me. I don't know. This could be completely me talking out my booty. But another reason why I think this might work, other than just thematic resonance and poetical storytelling, is there's been two times when there's been Pedathos-based warlock powers which have resulted in a white light. That has been at the end of the battle with Otan, and at the end of this battle, where at the point when a ginormous amount of red energy is released, there is a burst of white energy, and then something has changed. Now, in terms of that level of something has changed, if we put it into context of Vordo and Etherdoc, we have got fate, order, darkness, and shadow. Primarily, fate and order as relates to the Luxon. What do we get at the end of the battle with Otan? We get knowledge, we get history, we get all of the characters having a little mini vision quest of their pasts. Given that the Luxon relates so heavily to time magic, it makes sense to me that if part of the Luxon and Vordo are part of Pedathos, that potentially when tapping into some of the deeper magical resonance of Pedathos, that the power of the Luxon triggers memories, triggers a sort of inter-time-based situation. Again, could be talking up my booty. I don't know if this makes sense at all, but I'm hoping that it does. So after the battle with Otahan, everyone had these bursts of bright white light, everyone had these historical memories, and then they woke up in different locations and then came back together. To me, that speaks to the power of the Luxon potentially trying to trigger memories, potentially trying to help the party, trying to prevent another part of itself or another deity being destroyed by Pedathos. To me, that speaks to when something has been consumed that doesn't wish to be consumed, but still has some level of sentience, fighting back when they can. And when Predothos has given so much energy and made an exultant, in the case of the Uthand fight, he has triggered the exultant properties in Imogen's power. At the point where that much energy has poured in, a small amount of Ethanok or Bordeaux has pulled out. I don't know if this makes sense. I'm just talking. Similarly, at the end of this episode, episode 51, there is a burst of white light and time change, like distance changes. The characters are pushed apart. Now, from a meta perspective, this makes sense. You get to split the party. It means that you can have some more character interactions. You can have more character plots. You can introduce some side characters or have some guest stars, which I know has happened, which is really, really useful for cast members, because I'll be entirely honest, I fear for the cast members' mental and physical health. They have got so much going on. We have multiple parents. They're all full-time, doing voice acting still. They have the Mighty Nine series working on as all executive producers. They're still working on Legend of Vox Machina. They have games that they're releasing. They have Darrington Press that they're still doing work in. They have all of the original stories that they're still working on. Marisha has her creator clash fight going off. Matt, I don't know how I managed to keep all of this stuff in his brain, as well as successfully taking XPCs, absorbing them and putting them out in a cool way, as well as running the game. I don't know how he's doing this. I don't know how any of the cast are keeping up with all the stuff that they've got going on. I really, really don't. As well as them be doing for 8 years. So having the progression to have some of them have a couple of weeks off so they can do life things, and bring in some guest stars from a meta perspective just makes so much sense. However, from a story perspective, having a positive magical energy being triggered to help save the party to prevent potential future damage makes sense. To have someone looking over their shoulders. And given that none of the player characters, apart from maybe FCG, have any deity connection, and FCG's interaction with the Changebringer has been mostly for comedy's sake, and we've had no real sign that the Changebringer is actually themselves impacting his life, I think it really makes sense that having maybe one of the unique to this world deities, Ethodox, Vordo, the Luxon, and the version of the Raven Queen as presented by Matt, being potentially the deities that are actually looking out for the party, kind of makes more sense. Because if he's going to kill off the rest of the Pantheon, having those versions, these unique versions of the deities, being the ones potentially impacting this party of atheists or characters that don't really care about the gods, makes so much sense for future stories. So for me, it makes sense that maybe some residue Luxon or Vordo-based power is what has helped save the party from this potential cataclysm as a result of the key being triggered. That being said, I will be continuously nervous until we know that Xander, Captain Xandis, Ira, and particularly Keyleth and Bax and Rin, but mostly Keyleth and Bax, have got out safe, because I love Keyleth. I've always, as I said, part of the reason for me being really struggling to get into Campaign 2 is I did not relate to any of the characters nearly as much as I related to Keyleth. Keyleth has been my anchor to Critical Role. I love what they did with her in the Legend of Vox Machina series, but Keyleth is such a spirit animal to me. I love her so deeply. So the fact, from a meta-knowledge, even though these characters had barely known her, the only character who really had a deep connection to Keyleth, other than the general party's gratefulness for helping her get Laudna to Vasselheim and to Whitestone to bring her back, the only character who has as close a connection in Campaign 3 to Keyleth as the player characters have to her as a character is Aurum. I really hope that he is worried about her, but equally, I'm really, really worried about her, and I hope she's okay. I hope she's okay. I hope she got out okay. I'm so broken by this. But anyway, I think that's everything that I was going to talk about. But I think it'll be interesting that potentially from a meta standpoint, Matt might be moving towards smaller parties, having more players jump in and out of the party as go, so various people can have breaks. I think it might be interesting if he is going to be changing up the mythology of the world in terms of the gods, which again, he has got building blocks that he can play on those if he does want to change out the mythology of the gods. And potentially change the Pantheon, but give those, again, using Vordo and Ethodok as examples, their field of their Bellowick, that I've noticed that Matt really likes using that word, their sphere of influence could be passed on to new deities or to change deities. And in the back of my brain, even though I don't want this to happen because I do like the idea of a world where Keyleth is still in it and being active and living her life, and as someone who has always been a bit of an atheist in a world where there are active gods, the concept of her becoming a new deity would be an odd one. But to be honest, I think it would be really pretty if the result of new people becoming the new Pantheon is if Keyleth were to become one of the new deities of nature, replacing the Wild Mother, and maybe Vax become the new Raven Queen. And then they can just chill out together in the celestial planes. I don't know. I don't know if I want that to happen. But if that's the direction that they're potentially going, that would be a true way of making the legends of Vox Machina become legends in the world. And I don't know, I just, that's one of the things that was ticking away in the back of my brain, and I want to say out loud, just so that if I am eventually right, that'd be awesome. I don't know whether or not I necessarily want that to happen. I have mixed feelings, but it was just something that triggered in my brain, and I was like, I want to say it. Anyway. Just tiny note for the white light being connected to the Luxon. The Luxon is a white ball, the white shape. A lot of the Luxon magic is associated with kind of greys and whites. That's part of the reason why I was associating the white light after a Prodothus event with the Luxon and the Luxon magic, not just because it's the same sort of sphere of time-space energy and time-space magic, but also because of the colour scheme. And there seems to be a lot of very specific colour schemes involved in this campaign. Anyway, anyone who stuck to the end of this very in-depth, very long rant/conversation about Critical Role, Campaign 3, Episode 51, thank you. I'm sorry. And yeah, I'm looking forward to next episode when it comes out. Episode 52 is out on Twitch. I've not had a chance to watch it yet. I wanted to get through this thought unspoiled, and I probably will wait for the YouTube just because I can juggle my time a bit better being able to pause and walk away and fast forward and do all the things that I would normally do, and watch it again and again and again and again and again, because now I'm in it for the long haul. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about it. It was living in my brain, and I wanted to just get some thought out. No idea if any of this conversation has been coherent, has made any sense at all. If anyone agrees or disagrees, I would love to know your theories and hypotheses. I'm just really excited. I want to talk about it. Anyway, I'm going to upload this to YouTube. I'm going to have some dinner. And yeah, maybe see you in a week or so for another very long, I'm excited conversation type thing. Anyway, bye for now.